Best of r/malicious compliance episode 29. A family friend of mine just told me this story. I'll call him Mark. Mark was an ROTC in high school. This is a pre-military program in American high schools and universities where they trained them into officers for the armed forces. Mark has always been a carefree kind of guy, so he had hair past his shoulders. He would tie it up and tuck it beneath his hat. His instructor told Mark that he would be promoted to squad leader if he cut his hair. But he didn't specify which way to cut it, so Mark cut it just above his shoulders. The instructor knew he'd been outsmarted and still promoted him to squad leader. Mark was the only one in his own squad. Thank you. Next. Might not be malicious compliance, but here goes. So a little bit of backstory. This happened many years ago, around 2000, when I was a freshman in high school. I was a pretty troubled student. I had pretty severe ADHD, so my grades were never very good, not because I wasn't smart. I just couldn't focus in a traditional classroom environment. As such, I usually was a few points shy of failing most of my classes. I've since learned to control it without medication, and I have a 4.0 GPA doing online college. Since my grades were so low, I had to attend 2-hour-long mandatory after-school tutoring, which basically was just detention where you worked on homework, but you weren't in trouble. One of the teachers, Ms. H, had a rule that you could not leave the room for any reason, including bathroom breaks. During one of these sessions, I was doing my best to focus and work on homework. Watching the clock ticking was way more interesting. I felt the need to go to the bathroom. Since I knew her rule, and it was only about 30 minutes into the session, I figured I would try to hold it and wait till after we were released. After another 15 minutes, I knew I wasn't going to be able to hold it for another hour and 15. I raised my hand and asked politely if I could use the restroom, since there was over an hour left. "No, you may not. Sit there and continue to work," was the reply I received. "I have to go really badly. I'm not going to be able to hold it," I replied, starting to shift uncomfortably in my seat. "You should have thought about that and gone before class started. No one leaves until class is over," she retorted, and went back to looking at the papers on her desk. I sat there moving around even more, as the pressure inside my bladder was increasing. Accomplishing any amount of work was now 100% out the picture. All I could do was focus on holding myself. Finally, after another 20 minutes, I realized that I had to go. My lower back was starting to hurt from the pressure. I raised my hand once again. "Ms. H, I absolutely have to go. I cannot hold it. My back is starting to hurt from it." "No. You will sit there and work on your homework until class is over. If you ask again, I'll give you a detention for breaking the study rules." At this point I realized I wouldn't win, and I was too much of a goody two-shoes to defy her and just walk out. I knew I had to get some relief, and desperate times call for desperate measures, so I decided I would pee my pants just a little bit, not enough to soak them, but enough to relieve some pressure. I tried to carefully relax and let just a little out, but as soon as I started, the floodgates opened. I felt so much relief that I didn't even care that my pants were soaked, and it was pouring down my legs and onto my shoes and the floor. I was sure that the whole classroom had heard me, but as I looked around, no one had even looked up from their papers. It was about now that I realized that I was sitting in a pool of pee. We had those plastic bucket type desks with the tabletop built onto them, and the seat was now filled with piss. I smirked as I realized that she would have to deal with the mess when I left. I finished the study hall and left as soon as I could. Luckily I was wearing dark jeans and no one noticed that I had soaked them. As I walked home, I kept thinking about her having to mop up my piss off the desk and floor, and I ended up laughing all the way home. Note, now that I've typed this out, I feel bad for most likely making the janitor have to clean up the mess, not the teacher, but at the time I didn't think cause and reaction like that. I've also realized that when I become a teacher, my major is English education, I will never tell a student they can't use the bathroom. TL. Doctor, teacher says I can't use bathroom, Q Laco piss around my desk. Thank you. Next. First time posting. English is not my first language. Typing in the phone. It happened to me 4 years ago. I worked in an accountancy office for 6 months, and in this time we had a change in our department supervisor. The new supervisor, NS, at first, was like a nice old man, with a big heart and a lot to offer. With given time, we discovered he was a snake who constantly took credit for our jobs and ideas, and slanderous to our boss. In my 4th month of work, NS's 3rd month, our colleges started dropping out of the company like flies. No one wanted to work there anymore, and getting the complaints to the boss wouldn't help, because, since he dragged our names, we looked in the wrong. The boss's wife also worked in the office, and she was a lovely lady. Me and her got along very well. I was the lowest ranked in our department, but she always had me do stuff, cause she knew I could finish up almost anything faster than the others. Whenever she gave me a task, I would do it and notify her so she could give continuity to such task. One day, as I was going into her office to let her know about the latest task being finished, NS asked me where was I going. I reply I am going to let her know the task was done. I think he had a bad feeling, thinking I was going to drag his name or something, so he said, and I remember these words perfectly, "I'm your supervisor. You respond to me, and if I see fit, I'll let her know." It clicked. Okay, for the following days, every time I got a new task from her, I would finish and notify him. The task started to slow down to the point where I got one task/week. Then one day she came to me and said in a very serious tone, "I need you to count the number of file boxes with more than 5 years we have so we can get it incinerated. This need to be done until Friday, and you need to let me know immediately after you finish." It wasn't her normal tone of asking for tasks, so I knew something was wrong and had an idea what it was. The week goes by and I finish counting on early Friday and even organized the boxes with more than 5 years. I go to NS, asked if I could go notify her. To what he reply, "I told you, that's my job." Now, I know I left out the immediately part, and the deadline, but this old crow went too far for too long. Monday came and as soon as I hit the clock, I was called on boss office. I get there, and there is his wife, looking very upset. That broke my heart, cause I really liked her, but it had to be done. She and the boss started talking about how I've been slacking. How they couldn't count on me anymore cause I rarely would do the tasks passed on to me and stuff. The boss also gave me a bunch of tasks daily, but his were easier to see me doing, since most of the time involved going to the bank. Turns out she had lost her weekend counting the boxes, since my report never got to her hands. At this point, I took out my notebook, where I wrote down all tasks asked of me, and the date and time I finished such task. They're both speechless. I've been doing everything asked of me, and they wouldn't get notified. I let them know about NS's rule to not pass anything to them anymore. At this point I take an already written resignation letter, saying working there has become unbearable, which gave me the space to tell them everything that happened in the office without having them think it was biased. I left with a pretty sweet resignation deal. 2 weeks later I spoke with one of my former co-workers and found that NS was put under a magnifying glass and they discovered a bunch of stuff he was doing wrong, and a bunch of stuff he said he was doing, but was done by someone else. He was let go immediately with no termination deal, disciplinary action. Nice bonus. The replacement supervisor seems to be really nice. Both the RS and this co-worker still work there to this day. Thank you. Next. Now this did not happen to me but to my dad. Also a long time ago, I believe in the 70s. During this period my dad was driving with my mum inside a tunnel in the capital of per country. Now inside this tunnel the speed limit was 50 km/h and my dad was driving around that speed limit as well. Nothing strange so far, but then a police officer showed up behind him and started to tailgate him. The police officer didn't have any lights flashing or siren on. Back then there was no way for the officer to pass my dad on a safe manner, but my dad assumed he was in a rush so decided to speed up till around 70 km/h so that the officer could pass more quickly at the other side of the tunnel. The whole time the officer kept tailgating him. Then after a little while the officer came with a message through the megaphone. The police cars back then were usually equipped with this, and said, "Sir, do you know you may only drive 50 km/h here?" So my dad did the only reasonable thing he can think of and slammed the brakes till he was driving 50 again. The officer however was still tailgating him and had to slam the brakes even harder. According to my dad, the officer did manage to avoid a collision, but when he overtook my dad at the end of the tunnel, he was brightly red in the face and went off on his merry way without ever pulling my dad off the road for a talk. Thank you. Next. This is my favorite story to tell about my job of a year and a half of working at my local McDonald's. Compliant. Yes. Malicious. Your judgment. So I spend most of my time working the kitchen. On the line we assemble the main products of your order. Big Macs, Quarter Pounders, McChickens. Basically it's very repetitive. One thing you probably know is that you can customize your order. If this is done at the till, then it is fine, as the till worker has experience and can moderate the requests. However, on the kiosk order screen, if you don't know what these are, they are these things. They can put through whatever they want. So this short story happens when I was doing a 4 to midnight shift some time ago. There we are, making normal orders, when a kiosk order comes through. The mad lad ordered a hamburger with no bun, no sauces, no toppings, and no meat. They basically ordered nothing, since they removed everything. My wage slave autopilot mode turns off and all three of us online give each other this look after reading the ticket as if to say what the fuck. Anyway, policy is to stick the sticker with their modifications on the wrapper of the burger and dress accordingly. So that's exactly what we did. We stuck their plain, no bun, no meat sticker onto a hamburger wrapper, folded it and sent it down the line, to front, ready for it to be bagged up and served. The manager working front, well, they didn't notice us doing this or the front of house worker keeping the momentum, putting that folded wrapper in a bag and handing out the customer's order. The customer, a giggling teen, walked up to the counter, and that smug little grin fell off as he opened the bag, and realized he had actually just paid 89p for some paper in a paper bag. And that is the story of the nothing burger. TL. Doctor customer orders nothing for 89p, and gosh darn gets it. Thank you. Next. This happened to my dad, so some of the details may be incorrect as I only know them indirectly. My dad was a career officer in the US Air Force. If you served in the military for at least 20 years, you would receive a pretty significant retirement package. The exact amount varies based on rank and other factors, but it would easily be multiple tens of thousands of dollars per year for the rest of your life. Since this turns out to be pretty expensive for the government, a new rule was put into place to limit the number of people who could qualify. If you were passed over for promotion 2 times in a row, you got kicked out of the Air Force. This new rule went into effect right about the 18-year mark of my dad's career, and sure enough, he was passed over twice in a row. He was told he had 1 more month of service left to help train his replacements, and then he would be out. Frantic at the fact that he would be losing pretty much his entire retirement plan, he went over the documentation in detail. In it, he found a section that had been crossed out dealing with careers with interruptions in them. It said that if you rejoined the military after leaving it, which meant resetting your rank, and then finished off your 20 years, then you would get to have your retirement benefits at whatever the highest rank you had achieved was during your career. He then asked why that section was crossed out, and was told that while that used to be true, the rules had just been changed, and that loophole was being closed in 2 weeks' time, and since his employment was ending in 4 weeks' time it wouldn't apply to him. So, my dad announced that he wanted to resign his commission, effective immediately, and as soon as that was done, he immediately signed back up. Since he was back at the bottom of the totem pole, his pay was significantly reduced, but he finished out his 20 years at that lower rank, and then got his retirement benefits at the full rate. Thank you. Next. My dad just told me this story over dinner, but it's just too good not to pass along. Some minor details and conversation embellished for effect. My dad is a programmer for a government contractor. Something very specialized I don't understand along the lines of satellite communication. The nature of his job has kept him moving from company to company over the years as contracts shift and companies merge or lay off employees. However, my dad is extremely competent and has worked his way up to lower management. Think doing the same job, but with the added tasks of reporting to the bosses for everyone in his department. My dad also has always worn a baseball cap. Always. Every day. He wore a baseball cap to my wedding along with his suit. It came off for the ceremony and went back on soon as my wife and I kissed. I have never seen my dad outside without a baseball cap on unless it would be improper, a funeral for a friend of my mother's, or highly impractical, swimming. Now, having so many bosses from numerous projects, it was inevitable that my dad would eventually run into one or two hard-headed, by the rules bosses. One day, just such a person demanded that my dad remove his hat for meetings from that moment forward. He could wear the hat while at work unless they were facing clients. As lead programmer on multiple projects, my dad had been working with most of these clients for longer than his bosses as the companies changed faster than either the programmers or military. He got into a good-natured argument over the dress code, but was shut down. So he made a deal. He would take off his hat, but if anyone said anything, his boss would have to quote "my lunch." They both agreed and went to the meeting. They entered the conference room, sat down, and no sooner had his boss started talking than he was interrupted by the older black lady sitting across from my dad. "Lady, I'm sorry, where's Dad?" Dad pulls out cap while staring at boss and puts it on lunch. Boss, "Okay, fine, now." Dad, interrupting, "So what do y'all want?" Boss, "What? Dad, you agreed if someone said anything about me not wearing my hat, then you'd buy lunch." Boss, "I didn't mean." Lady, "I think pizza sounds good." My dad's boss was shamed into keeping his promise and my dad got a free pizza lunch and the freedom to wear his hat whenever he wanted. All the time. Edit 2. My father clarified that the lady literally didn't recognize my father without his hat. I left it out because it didn't really play into the compliance. Edit. Clarified who kissed at my wedding per the request of you/Bone Burrito and others.